Nada, who's a M1. Let's see who all is on here. So to get started, I think it's important to talk about what is performative activism. I know there were several people who reached out to me or I've had conversations with, and they were like, I need to look this up. I don't even know what this is, right? And so basically, it's activism that's intended to boost an image rather than actually support the issue. And the reason why it's a problem is because it doesn't come off as genuine. It's more so of, I want to look good, I want to look like I care, so I'm going to post these things. But when there's an opportunity for me to make real change or for me to really show my stance, I don't. And so I really want to show you guys this short video that really explains performative activism really, really well.
The 2020.
Can y'all see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Santa Fe, featuring Safe Exit Assist. Not available on the passport.
A good ally isn't focused on whether they're looking like a good ally. They're focused on showing up in allyship to people of color and not wondering about, am I going to be seen? Am I going to be rewarded? Social media can sometimes perpetuate performative or optical allyship because people feel like if I share this Instagram post or Twitter thread, that's me doing anti-racism work. Anti-racism work is taking a deep dive within first, really uncovering how you perpetuate white supremacy and then creating change from within. Posts can be helpful because people can learn about things that they may not be aware of, but people can get really self-satisfied from that place. We see these things that happen in the media, such as the hashtag Oscars so white, where the Oscars are being called out for essentially not having enough people of color.
Well, I'm here at the Academy Awards, otherwise known as the White People's Choice Awards.
You will see well-meaning white people get behind that, pointing the finger outwards, essentially, but not looking within their own community and looking within themselves and asking, how am I adding to this fact that everywhere in every industry, the majority of people who are seen as the experts, those who are worthy of being given value and award, are white people? How do I help? Some ways that people with white privilege feel like they're helping Black people and people of color are through acts that come across as white saviorism. Movies like The Blind Side, The Help, The Great Wall really perpetuate white saviorist narratives. The example of The Great Wall, we have this story that's set in China, but the hero of the day is Matt Damon.
I'll give you the shot.
This is mainstream media, and the narratives that we are seeing is, it doesn't matter what culture it is, it doesn't matter where these people come from, it's white people who are going to swoop in and save the day.
Yeah. Thank you, Bree. So I think that's an amazing video, short and sweet, to really kind of explain what performative activism is. And then there were so many other topics that were discussed in there, like white saviorism and all those things. And I know that may seem such like a new topic, especially if you haven't really experienced it before, or if you've never really had these conversations. So the reason why I feel like it's important to avoid performative activism is because if you truly want to make a change, if you truly want to support people of color, you have to do the real work. And I think a lot of people avoid the work because it's uncomfortable. I mean, even watching the video, it may feel uncomfortable to talk about. And I think sometimes the most growth comes when you're uncomfortable. Just like if you're not stressed in medical school, you're probably not doing medical school right. So it's the same thing. And so what does performative activism or allyship look like? It's usually just a post. You know, you'll share this post or you'll share this thing on social media, which is great. Like she talked about in the video, it's great to do that. but that's it. And I think a really, really good example is, and I've seen this happen several times, where maybe a non-person of color will see discrimination happen to a person of color, or they'll see something that is obviously wrong will happen. And in that moment, they won't say anything to take up for that person, or in that moment, they won't really say anything or do something to help. But right after the situation, they'll maybe go to that person of color that was done wrong, and they'll say, oh, you know, that was so messed up. I can't believe that happened to you. I'm here for you. I'm in outrage. I'm in disbelief that this could happen, which is great. It's great that, you know, that's being acknowledged. But really what they needed in that moment was for that person to use their privilege to stand up for somebody who maybe couldn't have done it for themselves in that way at that time. And so, like we saw with the Blackout Tuesday on Instagram, everyone posted black squares and things like that, which is great. But we really didn't know what the black squares were doing or why they were doing it. And that's a really good example of just this performative, I'm going to show people I care about something that has no real value. And I also want to make the point clear. Social media presence, or showing, you know, talking about things on social media is not bad. That's not what I'm saying, but just that is not enough. And I think really saying, oh, that outrage and that disbelief, of course you can have that outrage and disbelief. But I think a lot of times the people of color, we're like, how can you not believe this when this has been happening for so long, you know? Or how could you really be outraged if you really haven't taken a stand? And so that's what it can, you know, that's where it can really feel like performative and things like that. Okay. The next slide, please. And so before we get into discussion, you know, I wanted to talk about these couple of things, but I think we'll go ahead into discussion just so I can, so we can kind of really figure out, you know, how you guys are feeling about everything. So I guess, Bree, I'll ask you first. As a person of color, how do you feel about performative activism?
I think the biggest thing with performative activism, especially like noticing on social media, like you'll see people like classmates or friends who will post like Black Lives Matter or just like the black box. But then, you know, you look at the rest of their social media and there's no interaction with other people of color, or like you don't know if they donated to anything or if they've been to any protests. It's just this one little thing about Black Lives Matter without actually like showing how you as a person yourself have gone towards making sure that Black lives actually do matter.
Yeah. And I think an important point that I want to point out with what Bree is saying is that performative activism or allyship is not just a presence. It's more so character. Because you don't have to post everything that you donate, or every protest that you go to, or every Black person that you talk to. But it's really about who you are. It's not just your social media presence. If you're posting these things, but you really have not gone out of your way to talk to a person of color, or to educate yourself, or to really understand these issues and try to change these issues or have these difficult conversations, that's when it seems performative. Not because of what your social media presence looks like. And I think you really kind of explained that very beautifully, Bree. So when it comes to being an ally, what does that look like to you guys? You know, like being a true ally, what does that look like to you guys?
So for me, I think it also includes like having, like whenever you're having a discussion, thinking about any groups that might not be considered. So like, for example, like if you're in any organization where you're like volunteering and it's like you're only volunteering in particular organizations that are already being helped, you know, you should also think about other groups that aren't being reached. And so it really takes like thinking about like, okay, are we reaching the same people every time, and why aren't we reaching other people? I know it might be harder, but it requires like having to put yourself and like thinking about other people whenever you're thinking about organizations and that kind of stuff.
That was a good one, Vanessa. Anybody else about what does a true ally look like to you?
I think recognizing differences of perspective is really important because we all have different paths that we've taken and experiences that shape us into who we are. And I think it's easy to be around a homogenous crowd that has had the same shared experiences and not recognize that those are not universal. And I think when you get to the point where you recognize that people do have different experiences that change the worldview, you can have more meaningful conversations and recognize where they're coming from as well.
I love that, Duval. I think that's a really, really good point, is trying to change your perspective or really try to step in someone else's shoes and ask what's their point of view? How are they coming to this? And I think I had to do that for, I guess for myself. A lot of times I realized, I may come off as unfriendly, or I may not come off as somebody who's very outgoing. But a lot of times I'm coming in this situation where I may be the only Black person in the room, or there's not a lot of people that look like me. So I'll come in and I'll think, oh, these people have these preconceived notions about me. Let me quiet myself. Let me stay to myself, because I don't want to rub someone the wrong way. And then they feel as if all Black people are bad, or if they feel, well, that's exactly why I don't talk to Black people. And that's something that, as a Black woman especially, you have to think about. I can't respond to things the same way that, my other classmates can respond to things, because you're so afraid of sitting, fitting this stereotype that people may have of you. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, Duval.
So do you feel like when you approach a conversation and situation in that manner, you might be inadvertently perpetuating a cycle of different stereotypes?
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. And that's the hard part. You want to change it. You want to say, I'm not going to do that. But then you go in and your fear takes over. Fear is like the strongest emotion or strongest thing in your life. Like, it just completely takes over you, and you're like, you know what, I'm just not going to do it. And like you said, you're just further perpetuating whatever is thought about you. Yeah, 100%.
I think it's hard to get rid of that fear when everybody else in the room is not like including you. So I can understand that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I feel like I've heard a lot of people talk about the fear that they feel surrounding this topic. How do we help create a space that there's not really fear? Like, how do we become more understanding as a whole so that people will?
Yeah, I think basically what your question is, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that how, as maybe a non-person of color, how can I create that space where people of color feel comfortable around me or feel safe around me? And is that what you're trying to say, I guess?
I think that is one major component of it, but I think I've had a lot of white friends who feel fear even approaching the subject. because they feel like they're walking on eggshells. And if they say black around the wrong person, they're going to make somebody mad because it's not person of color. But if they say person of color, there's a lot of black people who are fed up with the political correctness, who they're like, no, call me black. We're African American. I don't care. Just I've literally had a black guy say that to me. He said, I don't care if you call me African American or black, just not person of color. I was like, okay, all right. What does that mean then? How do I handle that in the future?
Yeah. And I
so
think
it is both parts. Yeah.
I love that. And we are trying to person of color, but I try to, we try to be inclusive. But yes, and the reason why we don't like person of color is because the experiences are so different. So a Latinx situation or a Black situation or indigenous, that's all different. And they all have their struggles and they all have their caveats. And so that's why I think we should do that. But then you have some people who are they're like, don't call me black because that feels offensive. I don't know who says that, but people do say that. I will say the best way to do that is also to remember that although there are shared experiences among Black people, we're not monolithic. We're people, we're human. And I think just like you meet a friend or you meet someone else, they'll set some boundaries with you and you'll learn them and and it's the same thing, and I think that's the best way to do it. For Black people as a group, I think one, acknowledging systems that are in place. I think when people don't acknowledge that some things are different for Black people that they can't control, it feels as if you're just completely erasing that, ignoring that. And I think that's a nice way to make a safe space for somebody. And you don't have to bring it up all the time, but sometimes it's it needs to be acknowledged. And I think just being inclusive, and that's one way we talked about true activism or being a true ally is to be inclusive. A lot of times, I know me and Bree both had this experience, but we just had the suture clinic maybe a few weeks ago, and we go in, we have the line, we go in, we get in line, and you have to put the apron robe thing on. Everyone helped everyone else. Everyone said, oh, do you want me to tie that? Do you want me to tie that? And no one asked me. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I just don't really know these people. I didn't take it personal. But Bree,
at the same exact
different day, different time, same experience. And it's one thing where, okay, maybe a few people helped each other, but literally everybody had somebody help them, ask if they wanted help. And that's how those little things that no one thinks about, it wasn't malicious at all, but just not being included in that small act is something you take throughout the day. When I say you go home with that,
yes,
you go home with that. And in that same day, we're working on our sutures and an M4 comes up and she's not really helping me, but I think nothing of it. Like I said, I don't think nothing of it. I'm thinking maybe I'm not voicing I need help. Maybe I'm not. But then a physician comes up who is a Black physician, right? He's an ENT surgeon. He comes up and she says, hey, Natasha, do you know Dr. So-and-so? And I said, oh yeah, I do, I do. And she's like, yeah, he's ENT surgery and all this. And she's like, but yeah, Natasha would never do surgery. She would never be interested in surgery. That's not something she would ever do. I've never mentioned this to this woman. I've never expressed that. And I know she meant no malice by it, but intent versus impact is so important. Those little words, those little actions mean so much. So that day I had to take the weight of, okay, no one wanted to help me, no one included me. And then she felt as if I wouldn't want to do surgery or I wouldn't be worth surgery. I had to take all that weight with me, and then I have to go study, answer my emails, do everything else that every medical student has to do, and still have that weight on me. And so those are just small examples, but yeah.
I kind of have a question regarding just kind of not this particular situation, but just in general, when you have interactions like these, how do you tease out whether those interactions are biased or unconsciously or subconsciously because of a race issue, or it's just because it could be gender, or it could even be, personal, nothing to do with race or gender?
I think for us, with that situation specifically, I called Natasha and immediately started telling her about my experience, and the fact that she had the same exact experience, and like we were both saying the same thing. It kind of is like, well, what's the commonality in that? On a different day, at a different time, we both felt this exact same thing and had this same experience. It's kind of like, what's the only thing that you can point to if it happened to the both of us?
Yeah. And I think, especially as a Black person, you try not to make everything about race. Trust me and believe, I don't want everything to be about race. I don't want to talk about it. I wish it was something I didn't have to deal with. But every situation, I try to look at the evidence. I try to say, well, was it just me? What energy did I put off? What did I say? Is it really what it looks like to me? I ask myself those questions all the time. And mixed with the fact that it happened to be at a different time, different day, the fact that literally everyone else was getting help, it just was hard to deny. And with the situation of her saying, oh, she would never be interested in surgery, she said this in front of the ENT surgeon, she said this in front of my TBL members, and she didn't say this about anybody else. And so why me? And it could have been so many other things, but those small microaggressions have a different impact than they may have for somebody else due to, different things we have to deal with. But I'm gonna give you an example of being a true ally. In that moment when she said that, I had a TBL member. She said, it meant so much to me. I wanna say it meant so much to me. She said, Natasha, did you ever say that you weren't interested in surgery? And I said, no, I've never said that. She's like, okay, I just wanted to make sure, so you could still do surgery, right? I said, yes, I could. And that meant the world to me. So that's an example of being inclusive, of being a true ally. That's a good example. Mm-hmm. So yeah, anybody else, what does being a true ally look to you? What does that look like to you, I guess? Or if you have questions on what being a true ally looks like, I guess.
To me, allyship, I feel like a common theme of it comes down to recognizing discomfort and still being willing to surpass that time after time. And similarly to what Vanessa brought up, I feel like it's something that should and will permeate all aspects of your life, whether that's from an interest group standpoint of seeing who you're reaching and who you're not reaching and why, whether that's what Chase has talked about, when you're talking with friends and they may have that reaction of being fearful, being able to sit with that with them and be like, okay, so we recognize there's this feeling of fear or discomfort, why is that there? Questioning that first. And that's, for example, can be an uncomfortable thing, but it's being able to show up time after time and being willing to educate yourself beyond just, let me go talk to my Black classmate, but being okay, what are other resources, going from Google to anything beyond that. and being willing to make time for that to permeate throughout your life. I know as med students, we all are very busy and have a lot of things and want to do well in school, but the fact of the matter is, like, we cannot provide at base level equitable health if we don't educate ourselves about this. And again, like a lot of people have said, the importance of recognizing the impact that the system has. It's not about just a reflection of person-to-person interaction. Like, that's so awesome, Natasha, that you had a TVL mate that was able to do that. But yeah, like, I don't think allyship is just a reflection of, like, are you a nice person? It's, have you done the work? And Deval, when we talk about, like, for example, the example that Natasha had and Bree had, to us, it may seem as third hand, like, oh, like that could be attributed to a lot of different things. Like, that might be because they're Black, might be because they're women. But I feel like that's the moment when the concept of intersectionality matters so much, because regardless of what is the largest contributing factor to those, the fact is that, like, you and I, Deval, might go into that because of our experiences and never see that pattern playing out time and time again. Whereas Bree or Natasha or someone else, that is a clear pattern, and our minds are constantly just recognizing it over and over. So it reaffirms something totally different to them. And at that point, it's like, it's not as important to label where that is coming from, of if they're Black or female. It's just like, this is the experience, let's honor that. And Chase, like, for when someone brings up that fearfulness, or yeah, just genuinely not wanting to step on anyone's toes or say the wrong thing, I feel like it can be the same thing as, like, being sure you're using, like, the right pronouns with someone. It's just being as transparent with yourself and with them, and being willing to say, like, that's okay, like, let's work from there, and seeing how that conversation goes. But that's why I feel like educating ourselves is so important, because you can't enter those conversations until you yourself have trained yourself to work in that kind of space.
That was amazing, Olivia. It really, I mean, I'm glad we recorded that, because that's exact, like, 100%. You got an A plus. And I think a really great point that you mentioned is that if you're not in that space, it's hard to see why you could make that pattern. I think as a woman, I think we can all agree, like, as women here, the women here, when someone say, oh, you go to UAMS, and you're like, yeah, and the first thing they think of is nursing, right? First thing. And you could say, oh, maybe it was an honest mistake. Maybe it wasn't because I was a woman, right? And it wasn't malicious. You know it wasn't. But it's a pattern, right? So as a woman, you see that pattern, and you know it's most likely attributed to your gender, because it just doesn't happen to men the way it happens to us. So I'm glad you.
Okay, if I, like, gently push back on that a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that where most people come from when they say something like that, I don't think they're saying women can't be doctors. I don't believe that you would be a doctor. I think they just mean, I see so many people at UAMS who are nurses who are women. And I know that UAMS is a big school. So I think that out of all the students there, I know there's so many women nurses there that I think that you're probably a nurse. I hope that people don't mean, I don't think you could do it because you're a woman.
Right.
If I had to guess, I feel like they're saying, I just know that there's a lot of female nursing students at UAMS, so I'm going to lump you in with them. Does that make sense at all?
100%.
Even though it's still hurtful.
Right. And I think it's 100% human nature to make patterns. That's how we've learned survival. That's how we've evolved. It is human nature to make patterns. And I think men are people who are asking someone, oh, are you in nursing school? Like we said, we don't think it's malicious. I don't think it's malicious. And I think they know the pattern of, usually nurses are women, maybe. And UAMS has a big nursing school. Maybe that's what it is. And I think going forward, the best thing for people to do is to never assume. Just like now I've had to learn not to assume someone's pronouns. I should ask. Or I should not assume someone's sexual orientation. I shouldn't say, oh, where's your boyfriend? Where's your girlfriend? I shouldn't do that. So I definitely agree. That's an unlearning that I've had to do too. So I definitely agree. I see where you're coming from.
I agree with Natasha. I think that's something that I've also had to learn. I think that as an ally, the best thing we can do is ask questions by taking away our own experiences out of like the equation. So like, like sexuality was something that wasn't a big part of my growing up, so coming into an area where there's more diversity, I had to pick that up. And I think that if we do take our own experiences out of the equation, then we can learn a lot more. And then you can also take that fear away because, you're not like, well, I'm not imposing my idea, so I can definitely hear where you're coming from.
Yeah. Oh, and I have Kimberly's question in the chat that I didn't get to is, how do you handle not wanting to speak for Black people's experiences when you're a white person in a group of white people? Bree, do you want to tackle that?
I think it depends on the situation. If you're in a group of white people that say at a board meeting making decisions on diversity and inclusion, then maybe you should stop the conversation and say, where is the diversity and inclusion in this meeting that's going to impact the Black students, the minority students, and everything like that? Because if you look around you and it's all white people and it's in a leadership meeting, like that's when you have to question, what are we doing wrong that we don't have the diversity that represents the people that we're talking about? I think if it's like a more personal thing where like maybe you're just like hanging out with a group of friends and they ask you about Black questions, I don't know why they would come to you about that, but maybe they did. My answer is Google is free. Look up some resources. There are plenty of documentaries, books, and if you have personally read a book or personally watched like 13th on Netflix, tell your friends, hey, 13th is on Netflix. Check it out. There's so much in there about systemic racism. That's a good starting point. And then, of course, let them know after you have personally educated yourself as much as you can, then approach one of your Black friends or a Black student. But make sure you have done as much education as you can first on your own, because it's not up to Black students to educate you every time you have a question. There's plenty of resources out there to at least get a baseline understanding of where we're coming from and where the experience is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that pretty much explains it. I think, and Kimberly, just to answer your question as well, like maybe if you're just in a group of friends and some topic comes up where maybe this is being talked about, and maybe your friends aren't as educated as you, or maybe they just don't see things in a way that you do. I think that, is an opportunity for you to use the education that you've acquired to explain things in a certain way. I think there's so many resources now that it's become a little bit easier for me to explain how I feel and why things are the way they are, to make people who don't experience those things understand them a little bit more. So it's a lot easier to explain those things. When I was little, I mean, it was just a feeling. I couldn't explain why or what it looked like, but now I kind of have the resources or the things to point to explain why things are the way they are, or why things make me feel the way they make me feel. So that was a good question. That was a very good question.
And with going off Kimberly's question, kind of like flip it around a little bit, like instead of thinking that you have to try to like speak for Black person's experience, one way to approach, if you're like thinking about this in a group of white people and feeling like the topics coming up, is may not necessarily try to describe Black people's experience, but describe help them understand the idea of white privilege and like how that plays into it. So I think a lot of white people have a hard time having their white privilege called out because they feel like they get defensive, they feel guilty, they think this wasn't my fault, this is something that like our ancestors did. They aren't recognizing like the systems and like patterns that have like developed over many years and generations. And so like, you know, rather just like flipping it around to like talk about the white privilege aspect in a way that might help them understand a little bit, like look around, like who are the people that we see in power? Who are we seeing represented? Like what colors are represented in your kids' dolls or books or just all these things to just try like help get that conversation, like looking at the world in a different lens can be another way to approach it, where you're not necessarily thinking that you have to speak, you know, from like experience that you don't have, but you do have the experience as a white person that ties into, you know, just I think allyship and all this stuff.
It's a really good way to put that. I like that a lot.
100% best way to put that. A plus, A plus, A plus, A plus. Yes, yes, 100%. And I also yeah, go ahead.
I think one of my, like, I'm always fearful of, like, I don't want it to come across as I am speaking for something that is not my place, basically. Like, I do not want to speak for someone else. And so I think that that's a really good way to put it, of kind of flipping it and saying like, okay, yes, obviously I am not a Black person and I cannot speak for their experiences. However, I can speak as a white person about my privilege and how that is not shared in the same way. Because the same way that I can talk very much about like how I've been, my experiences as a woman, as well as, and I can't speak for that as a man, but I can, anyways, yeah.
Amazing. I think an example is like, I'm not part of the LGBTQ community, but I can recognize the systems that have been in place to discriminate against them. Or, and if I'm in a situation where I'm being asked or we're talking about that, I could say, well, this law did this, or this happened because of this, and this is obvious discrimination, and that's why it's a problem. So that way I don't have to say, I think they feel like this or this. I can say, here's the evidence for why that's wrong, and this is a problem. And I think that's the same thing we would want you to do, you know, around your classmates. And that's around your classmates, your friends, and your family. That's the true work. When the pushback, when you could get the real pushback, that is what I need. And like my TBL member, during that moment was great. It wasn't just around me. It wasn't just around her friends or anything. It was a moment where she stood up for me in that moment in front of everyone and said, no, we're not going to do that today. No, we're going to make this as inclusive as possible. And that's it. She didn't make it a big deal. She just asked me a question. Yeah. And so I think Kimberly, like also, like Catherine was saying, in that moment, you could say, you know, I really don't have that experience as a Black person, but I know about this discrimination. I know about this racism. I know about this system that has happened to Black people, and I know that's wrong. And this is why things are probably the way that they are. So that's a good, I really like that you mentioned that. And white privilege is not saying your life is not hard. That's not what it's saying. It does not say that you don't work hard. It's not say bad things don't happen to you. It's not saying that you don't get discriminated against at all. What it is saying is that your skin color is not one of those reasons making it harder. And that's all. That's it. You don't have to be guilty about being white. Being white is not a bad thing, but there is privilege associated in that. Just like I have able-bodied privilege, a lot of different privileges, I have them too. So yes. Bree or Jeff or anybody have anything to add to that before we go to the next question? Or do you have something to say?
No.
Okay. Oh, this is a good question. So, can allyship go too far? Is the question. And if so, how? I'm going to open the floor up for if anybody has any thoughts about that first.
Okay, I'll say something. So I think that the performative part of it can definitely go really far. Like we talked about the Oscars and all of that kind of situation, just social media. So that definitely can bring a light that maybe the Black community may not want. You know, like that's not what you're asking for. Or just political climate right now, we are talking about like making all these changes that we are not asking for. So I think that in that sense, yes, it can definitely go far and not in the right way.
I'll give an example. So with the George Floyd protests that were going on, you know, you had your initial Black Lives Matter movement, peaceful protests and everything like that. And then you had people come in under the guise of allyship who then began to destroy property and stuff like that. And so to go back to the last comment, I think performative allyship can go too far when you're doing things under your own volition and not necessarily for the cause. But I would call it a sense of false altruism. You think that you're doing it because that's the what you think that should be done, but that's not actually what needs to be done. Now, in terms of true allyship, I don't necessarily know that it can go too far, other than to the extent of where you begin to believe that these are your experiences. I don't think that, you know, you don't want to, like the last question, you don't want to speak for that person. You just literally, your job is to be a voice for the person who is voiceless. And then when that person needs someone to speak to, because they don't have a voice to speak to someone else, your job is to be able to listen and not sympathize, but empathize. Put yourself, well, if this was me, these are basic human rights. These are basic things that everybody should have access to, and be able to do the things and listen. What do you need? It's as simple as that. What do you need? Not what do I think you need, but what do you need? And I can go on all day, so I'm going to cut that off there. But yeah,
that's it. 100%, 100%. And I think a lot of people who sometimes go too far, most of the time their intentions are good. And I think a lot of times they're like, what? I thought I was being a good person. I thought I was helping. Where did I go wrong? I can't do anything right. This is why I don't want to help, because this is confusing. This is frustrating. But like Jeff said, the question is, what do you need? I'm not in your situation. I don't know your needs. What do you need? Not what do I think you need? I think a good example, kind of like what Bree was saying, was if you're in a situation where there are people in a room discussing minorities, people of color, Black people, discrimination, privilege, all those things, and you look around the room and there's no one that represents the people that you're talking about, no matter how great your intentions are in that moment, no matter how much education you have, no matter the details, no matter if everything you're saying is great, right, good, if you don't have that representation, you're contributing to the problem. So that's a great example, Jeff. And Bree, I know you mentioned that earlier. Like, that's exactly.
Yes, exactly. And I also feel like it relates to our patience as well. You know, Jeff was saying sometimes people think they are giving somebody what they think they need and not what the person actually needs. And so I think a lot of times, you know, physicians sometimes do that as well. They come in with their own bias or with their own thought of what a minority patient needs without actually considering, the background of that patient. And so I think that's another way of being a true ally, is understanding that systemic racism and outside factors are going to affect your minority patients a lot different than they will affect other patients. And so you really have to take an individualistic approach to how you communicate and interact with your patients, so that you understand it's not always what you think they need, it's what they are actually telling you that they need.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think I'm trying to look at from the perspective as a non-person of color right now. I'm trying to think, like, as a physician, you know, if you do have a Black patient and you're prescribing a medication and maybe the medication may be expensive, and you're afraid of saying, oh, can you not afford it? Because you're afraid of them saying, oh, you think I can afford it because I'm Black? But you're also wanting to make sure that you're meeting them where they're at, right? And I can see how that could be so hard. You're like, how do you do that? And I do want to say there's nuance to it. And like Bree saying, it's an individualistic, yes, approach. Like we said, you know, like I said earlier, it's like each person is different. We are humans, we are people. We're not monolithic. Get to learn the person, get to learn your patient before you just assume things. And then also understand that, I'll go in that later, but yes, get to know the person before you make assumptions. And I think there's a way to ask things in a respectful way for people to not assume that it was disrespectful. Yeah, like there's a certain way.
I think that was what I was thinking with when allyship goes too far. Like when you start assuming the worst about people, like that's too far. And I think that's admirable that you're like, okay, this happened to me. How can I reason through this and think that they're not trying to do this? I'm like, that's an admirable quality. So thank you for doing that. That makes me feel like I'm not walking on eggshells. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Good. I think, and another thing is what I'm just thinking about now is like, sure, I think as a non-person of color, they would maybe educate themselves on like housing discrimination or the wealth gap or all these different things, and they may go see a Black person or have a conversation and they may just automatically assume they don't have money or that they don't have a home, and they'll voice that, and they're thinking, hey, I'm acknowledging things weren't the same. I'm acknowledging that I want to help you. I want to be there the way that I can. But to me, it feels as if, are you just going to make this assumption about me before you even learn about my situation and who I am and things like that? And Bree, you know, has happened to us many times, you know? So yeah, that's a good point, Chase.
I have a
Yeah,
hey, sorry. I have a question, just like speaking to performative activism, and then like Jeff, you were talking about the George Floyd protests, and I feel like especially around that time, I saw all these posts that were like, text your Black friends, and then like I have friends who are Black who are like, I'm so annoyed, like everyone's texting me, and like I haven't talked to these people in so long, but then I have some people who are like, yeah, I really appreciated hearing from others and like them checking in on me. And so I guess I'm just wondering, like, could you maybe speak to just like that in a way where not have to, I don't know, respond to how they're feeling in these kinds of times? So how do we navigate that?
So in my opinion, that's person dependent. And what I mean by that is, if you on a regular basis don't communicate with that person on that level, it, for the majority, I can't speak for everybody, but for myself, that is annoying, because we don't have that type of relationship, you know, and it comes off, and you may mean well, but you know, where were you when I was struggling with my test or some, you know, normal things? Now, if you have a relationship with that person and you all speak on that level, I had a few classmates around that time call as well, just like how you said, and we were on that level. And so if you're on that level with a person that you know that they know that you're genuine, then yes. But if your only conversations is with that person is, hey, how you doing, goodbye, and then all of a sudden you want to have this deep, I'm sorry that you're going through this. Well, because we don't talk, you don't know what I'm going through. Let's have a conversation of what, before this time, of my well-being and stuff like that. So you have to just know your relationship with that person and play it by ear in terms of that. Don't just assume that every Black person needs to hear you and feel that you need to say that you're sorry and all of that different type of stuff. It's more person to person and what your relationship is with that person.
I agree with
Absolutely.
Jess as well, but I also feel like if you're coming from the right place and that's how you want to have a jumping off point to start in a relationship, then I think that's great. I think what kind of annoyed me was I had people who texted me and were like, how are you doing? And I was like, oh my goodness, did I just make a new friend? And I respond. And then it was like, okay, I found out how you're doing. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. And I'm like, I'm like, here I am thinking we're about to have like a conversation or we're about to be friends or like because I had people also that like I was friends with previously, but because of life, med school, everything, we hadn't talked in a while. And so I was like, oh, we're about to reconnect. And it was like, no, I just want to check on you for like 5 seconds and then I'm gonna go back to my life. And it's like, that was great, but if you really cared, this is something that could have continued. And I think that was the annoying part to me. I didn't mind people reaching out to me. I just didn't feel like they were reaching out for me for the right reasons if that was the only communication that we had.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I definitely got a text message just today from someone, hey, just checking in to see how you're doing. And that's cute. I think also I want to make the point is Black people in general, especially Black students, there's so much weight there. There's so much on our shoulders. There's so much stress outside of school, just being who you are. There's a lot that goes on to that. And I think, doing your best to not add to that can be helpful. And I think hopefully we're giving you some ways to not add to that. We don't really want to talk about race all the time. That's not something we want to talk about. This is not the time to come to buy, you finally talk to a Black person 3 times and now you want to ask this Black girl, so what do y'all do with y'all hair? This is not the time. We don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. We don't speak for all of us and things like that. And I think what we're kind of getting from here today is that treat us like people. We're individuals. And that's what we want. Don't make assumptions. Yeah. And so the last question, our last 2 questions before we leave. At UAMS, what does it look like for this true activism and allyship? What does that look like here at UAMS specifically to you guys? Or are you nervous about approaching that with maybe your Black classmates or just in general? Does that make you nervous, especially at UAMS?
I feel like one thing that I know a lot of Black students, we always kind of hear about how 3rd year, Black students often face discrimination or they kind of like put the fear in you of like, you might hear some things. And so I think for me, one thing is like knowing that like there are other students who might not be minorities who, if they see something, they wouldn't be afraid to also speak up. And that way, it's not just coming off as like the angry Black person who misinterpreted a situation, but also you have a white student who's using their privilege to help you and help everyone around you acknowledge that, hey, a discriminatory action happened. We're all gonna be behind you as you acknowledge that and speak out about it.
Thank you, Bree. That is so real. I think, that's one example of how maybe a Black student experience can be different from somebody else, because, like the fear of God is kind of put into you before you go into your third and fourth year, because you have to have these interactions with these attendings or these clerkship directors or these patients who say things like a classmate mentioned, oh, I haven't seen a colored boy as a physician before. I've never seen, you have to deal with that. And okay, it happens, but understanding that and saying something when that happens. No, maybe you're not supposed to tell the patient, you're not supposed to say, it doesn't have to always just be that, but understanding that that's one thing that can make our experiences different, because we're always nervous about going into third and fourth year because we've heard so many horror stories about what that looks like. Anything else about UAMS and how you think you could approach it here, or any fears you have about approaching true activism or allyship here?
Oh, I will say, I don't know the feasibility of this, because I don't know how much of a voice in terms of students that we have. But if you look around and you're not Black, look at how many Black classmates that you have, and see the small number of Black classmates that you have, and getting to ask questions. Why is that? What can we do to help? Because at the end of the day, your physician population needs to look like your patient population. The studies and literature have shown time and time again that physicians who look like their patient populations provide a different level of care. It might not be, exponentially great or anything like that, but it does provide a level of comfort for your patients and stuff like that. And, we can talk about diversity in residency and all of that all we want, but if there's not any medical students to apply to those residencies, so in terms of activism and all of that, from our level, getting in and talking with, high schoolers, or getting involved with the programs that we have with SNMA, where we're going out and reaching in the communities and getting people interested, Black students that are younger, elementary, middle school, high school students, college students interested in medicine, so that we can have a larger applicant pool, so that we can have a larger class, so that we can serve our patients that don't look like us, and it doesn't have anything to do with, and realizing it doesn't have anything to do with somebody taking a seat from you and this and that. It's more so providing the best care possible for our patient population. So.
Absolutely. I think you bring up a good point, Jeff. Like in our class, there's 174 of us and only 7 are Black. So we could pretty much make our own TBL, and it's just one TBL. And I just want you to imagine how lonely that may feel. And so that's why it's important to, try to be inclusive. I think it's a really good example of true allyship, which is something you could do at UAMS and things like that. Are there any other points on that? Are there any concerns or fears or questions you have?
I think the only 2 things I can add to that is a big one, like when we spend time volunteering at free clinics or things, or talking about different patient populations, not saying that community or south of there, that community and those problems. It's using the language of like our community. It's not that we are some high and mighty group providing something to that community over there. And then secondly, I feel like we as UMS students, even though we're remote right now and all have different things on our plates in life. Knowing when and how to speak up, and it goes beyond just like recognizing, for example, if like there's a microaggression that's happening on lecture or conversations on social media and things, being able to go beyond just like, oh yikes, that feels weird, to being like, okay, so like what are some of the real tangible changes we as a whole group of students can make. And I feel like for us, and especially M1 and M2 year, we can have a large impact in shaping curriculum at UAMS. And I think we all know there's always so much more to be done when it comes to our training and our ability to provide equitable care beyond just race, but even like all the things that we've learned so far, and like how do we navigate conversations about weight, and how do we talk about even like lifestyle changes, or like we had the palm smoking cessation lecture, or when it comes to climate change and environmental pollutants. There's so many things. And so I feel like we as students tend to sort our lives by our personal life, and this is how we feel, and like we don't want to bring our political viewpoints or things into the professional realm at UIMS. But there are certain things that are necessary for us to be trained in during our medical education if we want to provide good care to everyone in our community. And so emailing our deans and emailing all of our student leaders and talking amongst each other to get a good cohesive plan so that we can present to deans and present to the curriculum committee about things that we would like to see change within our class and future classes.
Thank you, Olivia. I definitely agree. And one thing I want to say, I think it was you. I want to say it was you. You asked, I think in a lecture, I can't remember. I think it was a blood pressure. Was it high blood pressure? And we were talking about the different medications, and they were like, oh, don't use this for Black patients or whatever, use this. And that was it. Or they say, oh, high blood pressure is higher in Black populations, that's it. Diabetes is more prevalent in Black populations, and that's it. And you asked, it wasn't derogatory, it wasn't a big deal, you didn't make a big deal out of it. You just asked a simple question. Can we get more information about why that is? Are there resources can you expound upon that? And that means a lot. That's the example of using your privilege to combat the issues. That's an amazing example, because in front of everybody, you stood up. And I'm really grateful for that, because we're too afraid to do it because we don't want to come off as if we're the angry Black person who's always mad about race and always mad about racism. So I really appreciate that, but that's an amazing example too. Any last thoughts, questions, concerns, fears about, how to be an ally?
I feel like sometimes, I'm sorry, go ahead. Hey.
Oh, well, I'm a very bad speaker. I just kind of wanted to submit this little thing, I feel like along the lines of a lot of what we've been talking about, it's very hard for anyone, but probably most of all med students, to admit when we're wrong. I think we've seen a lot of that. And it's very easy to say, I'm not racist, I don't see color, and keep doing what you're doing. Or to say, well, Natasha just looked like she had her robes. It was just this, that, the other. It's a lot harder to sit and go, did I do something wrong? What could I have done? And what can I do to make it better? And, like Chase, you kind of talked about like the like frequently I always feel like I'm, walking on eggshells, which, yeah, it's very hard to get into these conversations. And yeah, you're going to step on some eggshells. But if the response is they were sensitive, they were too sensitive, and you're not engaging and asking, how can I be better internally, and acknowledging that you did something wrong, we're failing as physicians. I mean, just the other day, my friend is dating a Black man, and she's white, and she goes to see her doctor, and the doctor says to her, this is in Louisiana, he says, "I'm not racist, but I just don't think milk should mix with coffee." And
That's a physician. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's real, and that's obviously an extreme example, an abundant example, I regret to say, but in little ways we do contribute to that. If I'm just content to say, oh well, she just didn't think Natasha could be a surgeon because Natasha seems too nice, but she's fine with other nice people. I'm just trying to justify this to myself and not ask myself hard questions at the end of the day. So that's all.
Amazing. A+, A+, A+. Y'all have done an amazing job today. I'm so glad this conversation was productive. It was respectful. It was a really great conversation. I'm trying to be cognizant of time, but if anybody has any more questions, fears, concerns that they want to voice really quickly. Yeah.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
So just for the non-people of color that are on the call, just notice quickly how many people are on this call right now and how many people that you interact on with a daily basis. So in order for there to be an effective systemic change, you have to take what you've learned and what you've heard and pass that on to the people that you interact with that weren't part of this conversation in order for this to, because 20 is good, 30 is good, but until we get, everybody on board, the changes and all of that will not be as widespread as if. So don't just hold this knowledge for yourself. Go on and spread this to out your friends that weren't on this call today.
100%. I do want to say who's on the call is who I thought was going to be here, because a lot of you have shown interest, have shown activism, allyship anyway. So, that's what it is. It is what it is. But I do want to, like Jeff was saying, make the point that we have people who are representing our class. And there have been several meetings like this, and they haven't been to any of them. And I just want to make the point of, how does that make me feel? Or how does that make a Black student feel to know that there are people who represent our class, whether that's Honors Council or whatever, who represent our class and who have not made any effort to learn more about diversity and have these difficult conversations.
So I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I just have one thing, kind of what Jeff's saying about systemically making change. I feel like the faculty at times, or admin, it seems kind of performative what they're doing. And I really wish we could have more spaces where we were talking to the faculty. I really appreciate Dr. McLaughlin's on this call, and I'm just wondering, are those conversations happening and a lot of us just don't know about it, or should if we're reaching out and they're not responding, what could we do to?
I will say there are many conversations being had about these specific topics going on behind closed doors. We've had many meetings, and I mean, this is just my assessment, but it seems as if faculty or the admin are really trying to get stuff done. And from my experience, I appreciate. Now, can we do a better job of, letting everyone know what's going on? Maybe so, but from what is being done and the conversations that we have been had and some steps that we're moving in the right direction from my experience. Now, is everything perfect? Absolutely not. But I will say they are willing and they have been meeting with us periodically. So.
Yeah. Many conversations have been had, and I have asked if they wanted to make those open discussions with other students, and at the time, the students mentioned that they did not want to open up those discussions just yet. I hope that maybe one day that will change, but conversations have been had. Hopefully things get better. Hopefully things change. But yes, those conversations have been had. And like all of you are saying, this is a great time to email deans and whatever concerns you have too.
Natasha, I'm just gonna add to Jeff's comment that, I agree ditto with Jeff. Leadership is hearing your voice, and they are having closed door conversations. It's not that I know you probably don't see change right now, but they are in the process of dialoguing and see how we can make change. And so, I am in the midst of those conversations. And even when we in our group meet, in our e-board group meet, we talk about, I think Mason's left, and Mason was just talking about, and Natasha and Bree, you can attest to this, about being his hair. We was dialoguing about that in group meet, this morning, about trying to grow his hair out and, being judged with those things like that. We having, dialogue conversations, and I take the feedback and I share it when they ask me my feedback, what's my opinion, but, voices are being heard. So don't think that, they're not, but they are. Mm-hmm. And I want you to feel free to, all of you have a question or you having a concern or something, come to me. I'm very open. I'm open 24/7. And I think Alexandria, Jeff, they can just tell you that I'm very open. And Carter, y'all can tell I'm very open all day. So, right, Rebecca?
Ms. Kim.
I hope that my internet's good enough. It's been telling me that I'm unstable the whole time. But yeah, I would say that I think the faculty are trying to make progress. And sometimes their seemingly gradual efforts aren't always advertised. So for instance, the very first curriculum committee meeting that I went to at the beginning of last year, Dr. Tarek reported on a project that they've been doing where they've gone on O2, looked at any PowerPoints or documents that are on O2 for all of M1 through M4, and they were marking anything that had any kind of racial context to it. And then going back through, seeing if it was an implicit bias, explicit bias, and then what kind of citations and things like that could be put onto those. Now, it was kind of a long project and an ongoing thing. So we ran into that with the hypertension medications in art class. And, he was willing to give that to us. Her belief is that if you go ahead and put that up front, that would be better. And I've tried to press on her to, kind of advertise that that's at least one of the steps that they're doing, to make things better. And she hasn't done that yet. So, but I don't think it's like secret knowledge, so I just figured I'd say that there are things that are going on that are slow and gradual that aren't always being advertised to everyone in the room. So anyway, that's it.
Absolutely.
I actually have a question, but this is kind of putting Ms. Kim and Dr. McLaughlin on the spot, because I've actually asked the dean about it too, but I'm not super familiar with why there hasn't been an increase in enrollment of Black students at UAMS, and I know that it's something related to just the number of counties that we have and it representing, and I just want to know, as students, I'm not super familiar, how can that change? That's one of the easiest steps of changing the face of UAMS, and it hasn't happened, and it really hasn't changed much over the years. So,
Jen, you want to tackle that first?
I'm having microphone issues. Can anyone actually hear me?
Can you speak up just a tad bit?
She said she's having microphone issues.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought she meant technical difficulties. Okay. But Vanessa,
Dr. McLaughlin, I could hear you, but barely.
I can try and talk louder, but I think that from an application point of view, our applications have gone up dramatically this year by 500 more. But that doesn't mean that there's been a percentage increase in the number of underrepresented minorities applying. So it really involves a lot of pipeline programs, getting younger high school age kids to recognize that this is something they can do as well and work towards it and have the support that they need. So the other issue that happens in admissions is that there's a finite number of underrepresented minorities in medicine that are available for all the schools to accept. And it's almost as though it's become a commodity, which I hate. But it's as though schools that have the financial resources to offer scholarships have a much better chance of increasing their numbers of underrepresented minorities because they make it financially, possible for the students to go to medical school with no debt. And if I had that choice between UMS or no debt, I'm going to take the no debt medical school. So even though we accept as many as we can, it doesn't mean that they all come here. We get a lot of people declining because they've had better offers, meaning more scholarships or a full ride. So depending on what you heard, I hope that helps.
And Vanessa, I'm gonna chime in from Dr. McLaughlin. For me and from my standpoint, I personally try to make sure that I capture or try to get a hold of everyone who actually is trying to apply to UAMS, whether they out of state or in state. I try to groom them and try to help them, ways even if they haven't participated in the DEI, PMSS program, MCAT prep program, and people still refer students to me. And Jeff can actually attest to that because he actually was referred to me, and look where Jeff is. So when students refer students of color to me, maybe they need extra help in their personal statement, doing interview techniques, when they actually need volunteer hours, or they just need help just completing their MCAS application. Students don't even know where to go coming from a rural area, and they actually look for someone actually that looks like them. I've never been to medical school, I never applied, but I sure can give them plenty of resources and they can help them. And so I actually am working with 6 students of color currently right now who actually getting ready to apply to UAMS. And so never been part of our MCAT prep program, never seen them before, but they reached out to me and Dr. McLaughlin. So I took them under my wings, and I tried to make sure their application become a more competitive student when they're applying here at UMS, and try to make sure those numbers also increase in that area. So there is one of the ways that we try to do. And as Dr. McLaughlin stated, when they come here, they change their minds. So DDI has started to do pulse checks. And we did our first pulse check when they got their letter, like trying to keep them engaged of like, why should you come to UMS? These are the different student organizations that we have to offer here. So we trying to keep them finding ways to, show them Arkansas is a great state, so, we are out here and we keep trying to keep them engaged and trying to keep them, students of color to be, to select UMS as their choice. Okay, Jeff, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I just wanted to, and I'm struggling asking this, because I'm a big numbers guy and I look at statistics and all of that all the time. And so I haven't looked at it as of late, but in my class, my the year that I applied, or whenever I got into medical school, there were 33 Black African American applicants in the state of Arkansas to MD schools, which isn't a big number. But then you look at the number that were accepted, and all of this data is on the AAMC website. There was only 8 that got accepted from that 33, that pool of 33. Well, then on top of that, we have 7 students here. We have 7 students here that are in my class from those 8. And then that means there was 1 more Black student accepted into an MD school that year, and that student went to Howard. And so I guess my question is, what happens to those other, however many that is?
15.
I don't know, I'm terrible at math, that part, but however many students are left over that didn't get accepted. Where are those students at, and why? Because if you look at the percent accepted and percent matriculated into medical school in the state of Arkansas, our numbers are the only demographic that is lower than the percent the percent applicate versus the percent matriculant rate is, our demographic is the only demographic that is lower in regards to that in terms of admissions. And so I wanted to ask either Dr. McLaughlin or Ms. Bland, where are those students, and what can we do to, at the very least, I know that we're not going to have a class of 50 Black students, but what can we do, or what are we doing to increase that at least to the number to where the percent applied matches the percent matriculated? And I also want to say one more thing. With step 1 going pass fail, I know one of the big issues is MCAT. One of the big issues is the MCAT. Well, in terms of what the MCAT is for, MCAT is to determine how well you're going to do on step 1 and this different type of stuff. But in terms of medical school, it doesn't really tell you how great of a medical student you're going to be. And so with the step 1 going pass fail, is there any plans of going to even more, I know that there is some holistic review, but an even more holistic review now that that data point has less of a value, because you don't need a 230 anymore. You don't need a 240. You just have to pass. And with the curriculum, it should be set up for those to be able to pass. So.
The admissions committee is doing really good work. We have 15 members, so we can't affect how each of those 15 is going to rank someone or what they're going to take into consideration or emphasize. But we are constantly after them to look at the whole applicant and not simply MCAT scores and GPA. Because clearly if someone is working full-time to put themselves through school, their GPA is often lower, they don't have the resources or the time to spend on expensive MCAT courses, and so often their MCAT score does not illustrate their actual ability. So we've been trying to change the mindset to stop focusing on the numbers as much. When you get below the 30th percentile, they get very nervous because there is national data through AMCAS that has, 90,000 people who took the MCAT and what percentage were accepted to medical school. So there's a lot of data out there, but there also have data that shows that there is a correlation between original MCAT score and their performance in first and second year and their performance on step 1. So that gets baked into their head, and they can't eliminate that, which is unfortunate because it just feeds into that stereotype that good numbers mean good students. There's a lot of data that shows that if you have a high MCAT, it doesn't necessarily guarantee you're going to do well on step 1. But that tends to get ignored because it doesn't feed into the narrative that people want to believe. that there's always this direct correlation, and there isn't. So in part, it's trying to get people to think differently and to take into account a lot more information. Did they go to a small rural high school and have, you know, the football coach for their chemistry teacher, and then do really poorly as a first-year student because, you know, they had come from a really bad school? So there's so much that affects people's performance all the way along, and disadvantages start at a very early age. So, you know, we try our best. I don't think it's a perfect process. We actually have more diversity on our admissions committee now than we ever used to. So I think that is helping as well.
That sounds good. You know, we just, as students, you know, we just kind of want to know that steps are being made. And we know that we understand that it's not a overnight process, especially with, you know, professional school. And so we appreciate the steps that you all are taking in order to take into account for what we're saying, not just because we're saying it, but because it means something to you all as well. And so we appreciate that.
Well,
yeah, thank you
so much, everybody, for the great discussion, the great questions. I'm so sorry this went on so long. I was not expecting that. Hopefully, in the future, we can have more engagement, more of our classmates here to have these difficult conversations so we can be the change that we want to see in the world. Like I said, this will be recorded. It will be distributed. Thank you guys so much for coming. Educate yourselves. The real work is in the action. These are great conversations, but the real work is in the action. I appreciate you guys. Y'all have a nice day. Thank you so much for coming.